In this lesson, we're going to finish up our look at the general category of the Preferences dialog box. We're going to start with the timeline. The next option is span-based selection. Now, this may not be immediately apparent what this does, but I'll show you. By default, if we select an area of the timeline in Flash, we can click and drag to select a particular area, click and drag to select an area containing keyframes, or we can select a single frame or keyframe. Return to Preferences, turn Span-Based Selection on, and with a single click, Flash automatically selects an entire section. Now you'll notice we have two keyframes, and by single clicking, we select the keyframe to the left and the entire remaining frames up to, but not including, the keyframe at the right. Now this can be useful if you want to click and drag frames around without having to click and then click again. So back to Preferences, turn this back off. Our next option is Named Anchor on Scene. Now this affects navigation. When somebody views your Flash web page in a web browser, if they hit the forward and back buttons, generally it doesn't do anything to the Flash movie. It only changes the page that's being viewed in the browser. But you can enable these forward and back buttons by turning on Named Anchor on Scene. Then we use the Scene panel it's down here under Other Panels to set up multiple scenes in our document. Now you might remember I discussed how scenes work earlier. If you don't remember this, go back and review. But basically, scenes are like scenes in a movie. So the viewer can use the forward and back button in the browser to skip from scene to scene. Depending on what you're doing with your movie, that can be very handy. Back into Preferences. Next up, we have Highlight Color. This is simply the color that's displayed in the rectangle around your object when you select it on the stage. By default, it's a light blue, but you can change this to use the current layer color. So layer 64 that contains this white rectangle has a color of pinky purple. So with that turned on, I select this, and our selection rectangle reflects the color in the layer. Fairly simple. And the same thing applies to these. Yellow and purple. Back to Preferences. We'll just change this back to light blue. And our final set of general preferences is Project. By default, when you're working with a Flash project and you close that project, all of the files inside that project will automatically close as well. But this doesn't have to happen. Untick this and those files can stay open, but your main project file will be closed. And finally, when you test or publish a project, Flash can automatically save all the files inside that project for you. By default, this is turned off. And this can help if you're creating extremely complicated Flash content that has a chance of crashing your computer or crashing Flash. If this is the case, turn it on, and Flash will automatically save these things so that you don't lose any recent work. And that brings us to the end of our discussion on general preferences in Flash.